St. Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologia defines a lie as the saying of the false in order to deceive. And there are two components to this. The first is the deception, which most people think is the real bad part of it, but not for St. Thomas. He says the real problem with lying is that one ends up abusing the faculty of speech by saying something that is false, because our faculties are not designed for things that are false. But we can say that every sin is analogous to a lie or is rooted in a lie. Because in every sin, like a lie, we know what the truth is. We know what the right thing to do is, but we do the wrong thing anyway. Every time you sin, you embrace the spirit of falsity, who is sometimes called Satan, but is also, Satan is the father of all lies. But he is, in a certain sense, the guiding spirit to all those who have embraced falsity. The spirit of falsity is a desire that truth not be told, or that truth not succeed, or that we are not willing to live in accordance with the truth when we know it. The spirit of falsity is caused by an unwillingness to suffer. We see this, that those who have a lack of mortification are unwilling to suffer the hardships of life in order to do what is right. We often see this when people are unwilling to defend the truth of the faith because they are unwilling to suffer the loss of human respect. It is also caused by a desire to lead a life according to the appetites or emotions. And when the people do this, they are willing not to follow the truth so much as they are willing to follow wherever their appetites or emotions may lead them. It is also caused by free will, because we freely choose things which we know are wrong or false. And it can also come from a habituation. As one becomes a chooser of evil, as one becomes a habitual sinner, one begins to hate the truth. Now, it doesn't mean that this is explicit. It doesn't mean that you say to yourself, I hate the truth about the church's teaching on contraception. That's not it at all. Very often, it's a more subtle thing, an implicit thing in which the person embraces what they know is false and they avoid what they know is true. The manifestations of this spirit of falsity are numerous, and they seem to be everywhere. We see it when we know it manifests itself in ourselves when we do not do what our conscience tells us to do, even though we know that the conscience is right. We see it when we choose pleasure of the sin again over what we know is true. It is also manifest in a lack of zeal for God, or in a coldness of charity. That is, we don't have any charity. And we see this lack of zeal of God or lack of charity, when we don't stand up for the faith in all situations according to prudence. Obviously, we have to follow the dictates of prudence, which says you don't say something to somebody if it's going to drive them farther from the truth. But at the same time, very often people are unwilling to say the truth because, again, they don't want to lose human respect. We also see the manifestation of this spirit in a broader context. It seems absolutely clear to me that we have seen the manifestation of this spirit of falsity as it has infested the highest levels of the church by virtue of the fact that the faith in the last 40 years has been virtually wiped out. Very few people have a willingness or a truthfulness about them to be willing to submit to every and each of the authentic teachings of the church. But we also see the fact that people just simply don't believe what the church believes anymore. And yet, those at the highest levels of the church are doing absolutely nothing to stem the tide of heresy and apostasy. And as a result, we can see that a certain spirit of falsity has somewhat taken hold of certain members of the magisterium. We also see this because they allow others to perpetrate evil even though they hide it. And this doesn't apply just to the magisterium, it applies even to us. That we sometimes allow people to perpetrate evil and then we hide it because we don't want to be blamed for it. But we see this, it was very clear when the bishops did in the end do a lot of talking, but they did absolutely nothing about the sexual abuse that has occurred within the church. It seems to me, or at least it is very appalling to me, when one bishop, clearly manifesting his unwillingness to live in accordance with the truth, stood in front of the media and apologized for it becoming a scandal. He didn't apologize for the abuse, but he apologized for the fact that he got caught, essentially speaking. There's also an unwillingness in all levels of the church, and even within families and things of this sort, there is an unwillingness to correct the errors of others. Because people have lost their faith, or because people don't have charity, the willingness or the burning desire to admonish the sinner has been virtually lost, and so the spiritual works of mercy are starting to be lost. There's an unwillingness to commit to sanctified perfection on the side of most people. Now, the spiritual writers say that most of us suffer what's called the horror of suffering. And what that is that because of our fallen human nature, we suffer, or we are afraid of suffering because of the pain that is involved in it. But the fact of the matter is that if we are not willing to embrace the suffering that is necessary to become holy, then by default we are forced to accept a false kind of a life. And it is false precisely because of the fact that at your baptism, either because your parents made the vows for you or you made them yourselves, and even if the parents made them, you are still responsible for them, you promised to uphold the teachings of the church and to abhor the works of Satan. And yet, if you are unwilling to embrace all of the suffering necessary to become sanctified and perfect, you are willing to allow the works of Satan to persist in your own life. In the political sphere, we're seeing this rather readily. I mean, it's a known fact that, they have a joke, how do you know that a lawyer is lying when he opens his mouth? Well, it's the same thing that you can almost apply to many politicians. It seems like they're incapable of telling the truth. And that's definitely the case with the media. I used to think that the media was ill-willed, and perhaps there is some of it. But having been on the front of the newspaper 3 times, fortunately for not anything disordered, but for all the right reasons, what happened is that even when I gave them in writing a public statement, they were incapable of getting it onto the paper properly. And when we become habituated to falsity, we're unable to grasp the truth because we end up corrupting through intellectual habits, bad habits and vices, we end up corrupting our ability to grasp the truth. And this is what's happening in the media, but it's also happening in the political sphere. For instance, you see this when people are willing to vote for somebody who's a pro-abort if it's going to give them some type of entitlement. In the secular sphere, we see it everywhere. The fact that the abortion industry subsists or is able to even exist there's no way they could exist unless there was perpetual and constant lying going on their part about the nature of human beings, about human nature, and about the nature of the unborn child. There is also rampant contraceptive mentality, which again is manifestation of the spirit of falsity, because God made our faculties to function in a specific way, and contraception short-circuits that. And so when people embrace contraception, it is a denial of reality, the reality of how we are designed and structured. We see it in the fact that there is license regarding sins against the 6th and 9th commandments. And we see it most pertinently when God himself, who is truth itself, when people demand that he and religion stay out of the public forum. If you're going to demand that truth itself remain out of the public forum, then you will be doomed to a spirit of falsity. We're all guilty of this spirit to a degree, and to the same degree that we are guilty of sin. If you do not like the state of the world and the state of the church, then start by getting rid of your own sin and the spirit of falsity in your own life. The best way you can help the church and the world is by getting holy so that you can merit the graces necessary to clean it up. The fact of the matter is, despite what certain people want to say, and with all the ecumenical spirit running around, whatever spirit that happens to be, the fact of the matter is that no grace comes into the world except by means of the Catholic Church. Now, that doesn't mean that people outside the Church can't have grace. It just means that they have it. It comes by mediation of the Catholic Church. And therefore, because of the fact that we are not as holy as we used to be in the past, it is a fact that we are meriting less for the world, and so we should not be surprised when we see it a disaster. You will never be a vehicle for grace for the world or for those in the church unless you overcome your attachment to sin. And therefore you must overcome your attachment to the spirit of falsity. In the name of the Father, the
Christus vincit, Christus regnat, Christus imperat. Christus